Welcome back to Mysterious Galaxies. I got my coffee in hand, and today I'm sharing 10 series I plan to read, or in some cases revisit, in 2025. Some are old favorites, others are new discoveries, and a few are long overdue reads I've been saving for the perfect moment. But enough talk, let's jump in. With Apple TV adapting Murderbot into a series starring Alexander Skarsgård, I decided it's finally time to dive into Martha Wells's super popular series about a murderbot, a robot that escapes enslavement, not to seek revenge, but to explore the meaning of life by binge watching TV and movies. Since its debut in 2017, the series has earned nearly every major award in the genre: 4 Hugos, 2 Nebulas, and 6 Locus Awards. Judging by the overwhelming fan support I see online, I'd say those accolades are well deserved. While 2 more books are planned, 7 have been published as of 2023. And although I'm a bit hesitant to start yet another unfinished series, I'd rather experience the stories as well intended rather than rely on Apple's interpretation. And for those curious about Murderbot and Wells herself, I've linked to a recent Wired article that offers an intimate look into how the series brought Wells financial stability and helped her navigate a life changing battle with cancer. It's a really compelling read, and I highly recommend checking it out. Next is Audran by George Alec Effinger, and it's a series that holds a personal place in my reading history. I mentioned in a previous video that I learned about cyberpunk in high school, and it was really transformative. I read everything in the genre that I could get at my local Borders. May the goat rest in peace. This series stood out to me for its gritty cyberpunk noir aesthetic and its vividly imaginative world, a futuristic Middle East that felt unique compared to the more familiar settings of Western centric science fiction. In the first novel, When Gravity Fails, the story follows Murid Aldrin as he works to uncover a murderer taking out innocents and criminals alike in the Arab ghetto. The problem is that the killer's pattern constantly shifts as they change their neural hardware. One time, our killer is a sinister James Bond. The next, they're a sadistic disemboweler named Khan. The only way for Murid to find them and put a stop to it is by undergoing his own surgical implants, something he never intended on doing. I'm curious to see how it holds up to my memories. Will it resonate as deeply now that I'm older, or will it surprise me in ways I didn't expect back then? This next series I've had on my shelf for a few months, and I meant to get to it before the 4th book was published, but I failed. It's no other than Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach series. I didn't know about Southern Reach until I watched the 2018 Alex Garland movie, and you know what, speaking of which, if you haven't checked it out yet, you really should. Although my wife hated it, I absolutely loved it. The way the movie blended the surreal, the environmental, and the deeply unsettling imagery was really amazing, and I'm hoping that the books expand on it even more. And if the books are new to you as well, the premise sounds pretty creepy. For decades, Area X has been sealed off from the rest of the world, a place where nature has completely reclaimed the remnants of human civilization. Each expedition sent to explore its mysteries has met a very disturbing fate. Annihilation, the first book in the series, follows our 12th expedition into the strange and forbidding territory. Our team is composed of 4 women: an anthropologist, a surveyor, a psychologist who serves as their leader, and our narrator, a biologist. Their mission is clear: map the land, document everything about Area X and each other, and most importantly, avoid falling victim to whatever mysterious forces have claimed the previous expeditions. Next on my list is the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. I feel bad for saying this, but the entire series has been sitting on my shelf since it first came out. It's right up there. I kept collecting the books, expecting to sit down and read them, but I never got around to it for one reason or another. Years later, the series is finished, and I'm just getting started. So, better late than never. Although I've never read any of Liu's novels, a few years ago I did come across his short story collection, The Paper Menagerie, and it was filled with some great storytelling and elegant writing, so I'm expecting more of that with the Dandelion Dynasty. And for those unfamiliar, the series is often described as silkpunk because it blends elements of historical Chinese culture and mythology with imaginative, innovative technology. In the first book, The Grace of Kings, we follow 2 individuals with very little in common: a clever and charismatic bandit, and a stoic and fearsome heir of a deposed duke. While rebelling against a tyrannical emperor, their paths cross, and they form a deep bond through a series of daring adventures. Together, they face enormous conscripted armies, soaring airships adorned in silk, and meddlesome gods with the power to change their fates. However, after the emperor is overthrown, their friendship is tested. Each emerges as a leader of a separate faction, driven by clashing visions of how the world should be governed and what true justice means. Their differences set them on a collision course, threatening to undo everything they once fought for together. Although the plot and characters sound interesting, I'm probably most excited to read a series that replaces the usual medieval European tropes with something that feels fresh and rooted in Eastern traditions. I tried scratching that itch earlier this year with The Night Ends with Fire, but actually, we don't have to get into that. Suffice to say, I'm still looking to scratch that same itch. Of course, I couldn't leave out The Age of Madness by Joe Abercrombie. This year, I dove headfirst into the First Law trilogy and the three standalone novels, Best Served Cold, The Heroes, and Red Country. And they were some of the most thrilling, blood-soaked, emotionally complex books I've ever read. Abercrombie's world of brutal politics, razor sharp wit, and morally gray characters completely consumed me, leaving me both equal parts awed and exhausted. So naturally, I'm ready to see what happens in this next phase of his twisted, unforgiving universe. The Age of Madness trilogy is exciting because it's both a continuation and an evolution. Set decades after the events of the First Law, this trilogy explores a world on the cusp of industrialization, where magic is fading, factories are rising, and the old ways of war and power are giving way to new, even more cutthroat eras. If the first trilogy and the standalones were about swords, blood feuds, and personal vendettas, the Age of Madness promises to bring in machines and unions and the crushing weight of progress. And of course, all with the backstabbing, heartbreak, and grim humor we've come to expect from Abercrombie. If Abercrombie's track record is anything to go by, our new protagonists, they're going to be just as flawed, compelling, and maddeningly human as those who came before them. From what I've heard, there's plenty of political scheming, military chaos, and darkly hilarious moments, all wrapped up in Abercrombie's signature prose. Gritty, poetic, and so sharp it could cut you. If it's anything like the last six books, I'm sure it will make me question my moral compass, rip out my heart, and leave me muttering Abercrombie under my breath. I couldn't be more excited. Now, let's talk horror. Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones is one I'm cautiously optimistic about. It's my first foray into Jones's writing, and I've heard some mixed things. Some people make him out to be one of today's most celebrated horror writers, and others say his writing is abysmal and an acquired taste at best. So hopefully I'm with the former, or this is going to be a very difficult read. You know those little index cards placed underneath a Barnes& Noble's book to tell you what it's about? On that card, it said the trilogy explores themes of memory, trauma, and the lingering effects of the past, which are some of my favorite themes to unpack in horror. If interested, look at my review of The Shining, which has similar themes. Outside of that, I actually don't know much about the trilogy, and I plan on keeping it that way until I've had a chance to start it. So, no spoilers. Don't spoil it for me. With our first space opera series on the list, I'll dive back into The Expanse by James S.A. Corey. This series is without question one of the most influential space operas of the modern era, and it's been a constant presence in science fiction discussions since its debut. I started rereading the series earlier this year with Leviathan Wakes. From the opening page, I was reminded why the series is a cornerstone of modern sci-fi. It has the sprawling universe, the meticulously crafted politics, the relatable characters, and the constant sense of momentum and discovery. I'm sure all of you are already aware, but for the two people out there who aren't, The Expanse begins with a simple but gripping premise: a missing person, a mysterious alien artifact, and two very different protagonists, Jim Holden, the principled and sometimes frustratingly idealistic captain, and Joe Miller, a weary, morally ambiguous detective. From there, the series expands outwards into a galaxy filled with political intrigue, corporate greed, war, and the existential threat of the proto-molecule, an ancient alien technology that's almost unfathomable. What starts as a noir-style mystery quickly evolves into a high-stakes epic that's as much about the people trying to survive in this universe as it is about the big, mind-bending concepts. In 2025, my goal is simple: to finish the entire series once and for all. That includes every novel and novella. So let's finally see how this journey ends. Next is The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, and it's a series that honestly, it just entered my radar a few months ago. A couple of people I met while reading the first Law books mentioned that Gwyn also writes great battles and his character work is top notch. And honestly, that's what keeps me so engaged in fantasy nowadays. I've been told to start with The Faithful and the Fallen and then move on to another series of his, the Blood-Worn Saga? The Blood-Sworn Saga, I think. For noobs like me, the series begins with Malice, the first of four books, and throws readers into the Banished Lands, a richly constructed world steeped in ancient lore, prophecy, and the clash between good and evil. It's a place where men and giants lived in harmony until an evil angel by the name of Azeroth plunged the land into war through lies and deception. Now, centuries later, the seeds planted by the god of war are coming to fruition amongst the kingdoms of man. Gwyn is said to take familiar fantasy tropes and breathe new life into them. And yes, there are chosen ones, ancient prophecies, and epic battles, but he elevates these elements by grounding them in intensely personal stories and relationships. The Faithful and the Fallen feels like the perfect place to start my journey in Gwyn's work. Then there's the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. And before you begin, I know. How have I not read this yet? This trilogy has been sitting on my shelf for far too long, quietly passing judgment on me with its Hugo Award winning prestige and the countless glowing recommendations from readers and critics alike. Jemison's reputation as one of the most innovative and powerful voices in contemporary speculative fiction is undeniable, and the series in particular seems to be the one that people keep recommending to me. 2025 is finally the year I stop procrastinating and dive headfirst into the Broken Earth. The trilogy begins with the fifth season, and from what I know, it wastes no time pulling you into a setting unlike any other. The world of the Stillness is constantly on the brink of destruction, plagued by apocalyptic geological events that have shaped its society and its people. It's a place where the Earth itself is a force of wrath and power, and those who can control it, the Orogenes, are simultaneously feared, oppressed, and vital to survival. I'm really interested to see if the series lives up to its reputation it's earned over the years. I know every book in the trilogy won the Hugo Award for Best Novel, so hopefully I love it as much as everyone else seems to. Last but certainly not least is The Culture by Ian M. Banks. I've mentioned in a few videos that it's one of my all-time favorites. But here's my confession. I've never actually finished it. Despite my love for this universe, I've left a few of the later books untouched. And it almost feels sacrilegious given how much these stories have shaped my view of science fiction. Books like The Player of Games and Use of Weapons remain some of the most brilliant, thought-provoking works I've ever read. And 2025 is the year I finally immerse myself fully into Banks's vision of the culture. Another reason I'm excited to revisit them is, quite frankly, I don't think it gets discussed enough on YouTube, or really anywhere in mainstream science fiction conversations. For a series as groundbreaking and influential as this one, it feels oddly underrepresented in the broader book community. I kind of get it. It's a dense philosophical series that can be intimidating to approach, but it's also one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever read in science fiction. The culture's exploration of morality, utopia, and the human, as well as the non human condition, deserves so much more attention. With this reread, my goal isn't just to finish the novels I left unread. It's to shine a light on what I genuinely believe is one of the best series in all of science fiction. I want to dive deep into what makes the culture so compelling: the sharp prose, the big ideas, the unforgettable characters, and the sheer audacity of Banks's imagination. And then I'm going to share why this series is such a masterpiece. Hopefully, I can spark more conversations about it, and if I can convince even a few people to pick up Banks, I'll consider this reread a success. For those unfamiliar, the culture is a post scarcity utopia, a society so advanced that its citizens want for nothing. Artificial intelligences run the show, and their benevolent oversight ensures that people live lives of comfort and freedom, pursuing art, philosophy, or whatever other passions they choose. But utopia isn't as simple as it sounds, and Banks's genius lies in exploring the complexities and contradictions of this seemingly perfect society. Through his interactions with less advanced civilizations, the culture's ideals are often tested, revealing the moral gray areas that come with wielding power, even when that power seems altruistic. What I adore about the series is how varied each novel is in tone, structure, and focus. Player of Games is a political thriller centered on a game that's both a cultural battlefield and a strategy challenge. Use of Weapons is a deeply layered character study that delves into the trauma, morality, and cyclical nature of violence, told in a non-linear narrative that's both daring and devastating. Then there's Consider Plebis, a swashbuckling adventure that introduces readers to the culture's vast scope and the conflict it faces. 2025 feels like the perfect time to revisit this universe. With each book offering a unique lens into the culture's ideals and flaws, I'm excited to rediscover old favorites and finally experience the ones I've missed. More than that, I'm ready to reflect on how these stories resonate with me now, years after I encountered them the first time. The culture is a world I've always admired for its ambition and complexity. I can't wait to unravel its mysteries and dive deeper into its moral dilemmas. If I have the time, I'd also like to try picking up Sandman Slim by Richard Kadrey. One of my viewers, Kevin Randall Emerton, highly recommends it. The series follows James Stark, also known as Sandman Slim, who escapes from hell. Literally. After spending 11 years fighting for his life as a gladiator in Lucifer's personal arena. His return to Los Angeles is fueled by vengeance, and the story takes off from there, plunging us into a world that's equal parts noir crime thriller and supernatural free-for-all. There are 12 books, so I doubt I'll get to all of them because something is always vying for my attention, but based on its premise, it sounds like a journey worth taking. But now I want to hear from you. What series are you planning on reading in 2025? Are you continuing an old series or starting a new one? Are there any other books you'd recommend I check out? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments. I love hearing your recommendations and thoughts on what you've been reading. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends, families, and even your enemies. And of course, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button because every subscriber inches me one step closer to taking over the galaxies. Until next time, take care, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one.